Greetings, and we're live. Oh, hey, I wasn't quite ready. Hey, Kayana, just a second. Wasn't quite, wasn't quite prepared. I usually switch to my robe. Oh, indeed. I mean, science must be taken into account when we are doing magic. To be clear, science is very important, and I don't mean to denigrate science, but the problem is that they want to pretend like anything that can't be measured doesn't exist. If you can't put it on a scale, if you can't weigh it, it isn't real. And that's where the problem comes in, is right there. The you know, it's like I said on a comment earlier on the short where I was talking about this, saying treating things that way, treating the things that you can't measure as if they're not real would be like saying the wind isn't real because you can't bottle it. And that actually is a really good metaphor for the way that I see it, because that motion of the wind, right? The wind isn't just air; it is the motion of the air. It is the air moving, and that's kind of like how magic works. It isn't on the material plane, right? But it moves through the material plane. And it can be extremely difficult to measure. It's difficult to prove empirically. And so they pretend that it doesn't exist. Indeed. Yes, this was one of the first great schisms, is when we took everything important out of alchemy, right? On both sides. Whether you want to say that the true descendant of alchemy is chemistry, or if you want to say that its true descendant is modern alchemy, which is all about inner transformations and that sort of thing. Both of these things, they're one thing. Alchemy should be and was the perfect amalgamation of the scientific principle and understandings with that unmeasurable quality. They weren't just studying the air, they were also studying the wind, you could say, if we keep going with the metaphor. Got a little bit of wine tonight. That's all we're going to be drinking for tonight. Had kind of a busy day. Actually had a Airbnb guest that booked like only 2 hours ago, so we had to run like mad and get the house all cleaned up and get everything ready. I mean, it was pretty much clean, but when you're gonna have a guest, you do want to beautify the place up a bit. Anyways, as I was saying, um, oh, there it is. Let's kick that off here and bring it up here where I can use it. Got a little leash for my lighter, but it was stuck to my purse. Okay, there we are. The air within the human is their blood. I mean, it's definitely part of the motion, but like with alchemy, you know, you have, like I say, they and like you said, they were one thing, alchemy and chemistry. That is where chemistry comes from. But when there were parts that they couldn't measure and they had trouble getting repetitive results with, rather than trying to understand the why of that and trying to figure out how to make that work, they just simply cut out everything they couldn't empirically prove or measure. And that is essentially throwing out half of the equation. That'd be like modern physics. That'd be like science at this point. Now that they've seen what's going on in quantum physics and discovering that perception can alter outcomes, that would be like them deciding, well, we're just not even going to look at that. We're not even going to think about that. We're just going to pretend that that isn't real because or literally find ways to mitigate it, which is what they do with the placebo effect, right? They have this known quantity in any of the healing fields that people can get better simply through theater of operation. Hey, Olmsted, they believe they can get simply because they believe they are getting better, because the things being done around them or to them are the things that their body believes will make them better. So they get better. And they call this the placebo effect. And rather than trying to accentuate this, rather than trying to find ways to incorporate the theater of operation to improve the odds of surgery working better and studying how to make it more and really lean into this factor that can be phenomenally huge when applied appropriately. Instead, they literally do studies to try and remove the placebo effect. They don't want it there because they don't want to have to deal with things they can't measure. They don't want to deal with things that they feel are slightly out of their control. And so they call it the placebo effect and then say that it's not real. But like I say in the live, you can't tell me the placebo effect is real and tell me faith healing doesn't work because they are the same thing. Placebo is faith healing. Now, to be clear, just like with modern medicine, it's not all placebo effect with your faith healing, right? With your Reiki healing, with any of your magical forms of healing, there's the energy work is going on. There is a level going on there where you're helping the motion and just the movement of energy within your body that helps get things to heal. Yes, they mostly ignore the extra physical effects. See, that's what I'm saying is rather than using it, yes, they completely ignore the things that they see as extra. They get rid of anything that they can't measure or empirically prove, or that isn't easily repeated. And that's the thing with that part of the work, especially with alchemy. Everything has to be done under the right circumstances for it to work. And sometimes there are things that are difficult to control because there is a context. Yes, it is extremely unscientific for them to simply throw out results that don't match what they want them to be, right? In any other science, that would be considered bad science, absolutely. It's like I said with quantum physics, they aren't trying to throw out the fact that observing the result can affect it. They didn't do that there. Yes, the placebo effect is repeated, absolutely, but it's hard to control the repetition of it and how to control exactly how it affects the person. Like it can be repeated, but it's extremely difficult to measure, and it can't be repeated in a controlled way, in a controlled environment so much. I mean, they have absolutely proven it because they have to take it into account with every single study they do. But like I say, they should have rather than trying to remove that effect, they should be doing studies on the theater of operation and what parts of the theater of operation help them can help them advance that along. Well, it is very predictable that a certain amount of people will be affected by it, but they have a hard time understanding which people are more affected by placebo. Essentially, which people are more psychosomatic. Yeah, well, they can't provide proof that it doesn't exist because it does, right? But it's one of them things that they just push off to the side and essentially, oh, well, it's placebo, so it doesn't matter because we can't measure it. And really, Romstead has a very good point. It actually is quite repeatable, but it's different, slightly different effect on each person. And I don't know if that's different people have different levels of actual mind body connection, making them essentially more psychosomatic than other people, or if it's simply how much you believe that the pill is going to be getting you better. There has been some research on enhancing it, it's true, but it's not something that's held in the mainstream of science. And when I say things like how science is trying to deny using the placebo effect to deny reality, I'm not necessarily talking about all the scientists. Yeah, and it makes sense because the theater operation that a injection would have more effect than a pill. Now, the psychosomatic thing, I wanted to talk about that for a minute because I do think that differs from people to person and also on who or not who but what it is that it's affecting. But like for example, I have pustular psoriasis, which means my feet can flake and crack and yeah, it's not a good thing. Um, but simply having the medication helps. Not putting it on, simply knowing it is there makes my feet much less likely to have a symptom. And when I do have a symptom, 9 times out of 10, all I actually have to do is get the cream and wave it around my feet. I don't even have to open the jar. Like most of the time, I don't even open the jar. I just get out the cream, look at it, move it around my feet, remind my feet that it exists, and my feet get better. And I've even found out that if when they are exposed to chemicals, because mostly it's when my feet are exposed to chemicals or something like that, they can crack and bleed. But I've found that if I don't freak out about it, if I don't have of an emotional reaction to the fact that my feet might have a reaction to the chemical, and I just calmly wash it off, my odds are a lot higher of me not having a reaction. It's the nocebo effect. We are definitely going to be talking about the nocebo, and I have a lot of concerns about that, frankly, especially like when you buy a pack of cigarettes, like up here in Canada, will have a little card inside showing you a picture of what bad things could happen to your brain. And the more you're constantly reminded of that, to your brain, your lungs, all the different things that could happen to you from smoking, the more you're reminded of that, the more you're told this could happen to you, the higher the odds are that it's going to affect you. You know, I talked about this a few lives ago with the nocebo. I don't think you were there for this one, but if I remember correctly, you live in Australia, so you may know more about. You may have heard about this as well. One of the peoples out there, one of the I don't know the names of all the people. I know they're not all called Aborigines. There's a bunch of different indigenous peoples in Australia. They weren't all one type of people. But one of the peoples out there, they have a form of essentially execution for the tribe. And if someone has done something so horrible they've decided they got to die, they get a long bone made out of supposed to be a human bone made out of like a, I believe, a leg bone, but they take, and all of the tribe observes this bone being pointed at the person, and that marks them for death, and that's all it takes, right? But there have had people run from this and try to escape, and there are people whose job, when this happens, it is their job to hunt these people down and make sure they die, but they don't harm them. All they do is they observe and remind that person that they have been marked, and they always die. There's actually a case of a guy that ran to the city and somehow managed to convince doctors to keep him in a hospital while he was under this death watch. And he wound up dying in the hospital because he had visitors that came in and observed him, and there was nothing physically wrong with this guy. But the nocebo effect completely killed him as soon as he believed it was going to happen. There's another case of that Zig Ziglar talks about a lot. Now, I don't know if you know who Zig Ziglar is. He was the world's greatest salesman, supposedly, and he certainly sold a lot of things on how to sell things. So he certainly sold a lot. But he talks about a case where a man was locked in a refrigerator car, and the refrigerator car was off, but the guy didn't know that, and he actually froze to death inside of a non-operating refrigerator car. And again, that's the nocebo effect. That's someone believing so much that they are going to be harmed that they become harmed. You know, you hear about all this kind of thing all the time with people in traumatic situations. You can actually die from shock. Just go into shock so bad that your body shuts down. That is an extreme example of what is essentially the same thing as the nocebo effect. You know, they know all over science in the health industries that attitude affects things. But then they say faith healing isn't real. This isn't the only area that they do this. Actually, I read a study. Oh, it's not just nocebo. To be clear, well, I'm not saying that being marked for death by a Australian, I don't know what they call their guys. I hate calling everybody shamans, but one of their people, one of their spiritual people from their direct direct ancestry pointed the ceremonial bone at them and marked them for death. There's more going on there than just nocebo, absolutely, but it is part, and it's one of the cases where scientists have had to admit that something went on that they couldn't explain. But then they use that nocebo idea essentially to say, well, this proves that the spell itself wasn't real because of this nocebo effect. The nocebo effect's just a little part of it. That's a great example of how they use it to say stuff doesn't work. Now there is part. Belief imparts reality, doesn't create it. Just like their belief that things that can't be measured aren't real doesn't prevent belief from imparting reality. It doesn't prevent the energy in Rigi healing to work. Didn't prevent that guy from dying after he had been marked for death by the tribe. These things are much more real than that, right? But they give them this moniker, oh, well, that's just placebo effect, and somehow that's, or nocebo, and somehow that's something you're allowed to toss away once you've named it and said that it is immeasurable and supposedly unrepeatable, then you can toss it aside. You can throw it away. You can pretend it isn't real. Because once you start accepting those things, you start realizing that nothing fits in a box. There is no such thing as a controlled experiment because even in the most perfect settings, there is still contact. You cannot repeat the same thing twice, ever. You can produce similar variables. You can, place stuff in isolation and repeat everything that you have around, but there is context, and there's greater context than they are able to really control, and that's why they're not able to get the measured results. Like, I read an article today actually about an experiment that happened in 2009. It started with, there was this, I forget what kind of facility it was. There's some kind of a facility where everyone kept reporting feeling a strange phenomena in this one part of the factory. And it happened enough that people started looking into it. And in this case, it did turn out there was some kind of infrasound coming off of the machines that was making people feel agitated in the room. So they started experimenting with electromagnetic fields and infrasound to see if they could make a haunted room. And they filled it with different things like that. But here's the part where they really fucked up in the study. Where they really messed up in the study. We're enough minutes in, I can get away with it, but I try to avoid swearing just in case I try to make shorts out of anything. Anyways, they put people in a room. They purposely left the room very neutral, very blank, so that there couldn't be anything in the room to trigger people. But then they tell them to go into the room and see if they feel anything odd, if they feel anything supernatural, and they collected the results. And they had something they called a TLI or something like that, which was how much they get queued up by being talked about, asking them to talk about deja vu or things like that before they put them into the room. And they expected people to feel stuff where these different electromagnetic fields they had created existed. Indeed, they show their epistemological conceit, as rather than admitting they lack the understanding of dimensionalities needed, they just dismiss it. Um, you know what? It turned out the infrasound, at least in the experiment, didn't have an effect. They found that the thing that had the most effect on whether people felt anything strange in the room was how much they had them talk about magical stuff and put them into a magical state of mind beforehand. And it didn't even necessarily correlate with where the infrared or electromagnetic fields existed. So then they still used it to say, well, that proves none of this is real. Well, you put people in a blank room and there wasn't anything really going on. Of course, the people that felt the most were the ones that you had hyped up, because for one, people can think they're feeling things. And for two, you hype somebody up, they're getting them closer to gnosis. The closest you are to gnosis, the more likely you are to experience phenomena. So if you're in the mood where you've been thinking about ghosts all day, you're more likely to be able to be on that wavelength. You're more likely to be in that way of thinking to actually see a ghost. And so that's the people that had the most, and it didn't correlate at all with where their electromagnetic fields or their infrasound or any of it was. And so then they use that to toss it all out again, and say it doesn't exist. But the thing is, they had no kind of actual supernatural phenomena to be working with in this setting. They thought that they had understood what caused it. And then when they tried to use the things that caused this experience and it didn't work, like, okay, well, that proves that hauntings aren't real because we couldn't prove how it works. Yeah. They do stuff like that all the time. Like I say, um, and it's not the scientists. I'm not saying this is some like conspiracy, but it's a mindset. It's a mindset that everything has to be in this measurable way and everything ought to fit in these boxes and we can make rules to understand the universe. And let's see, what was I kind of lost my train of thought there just a second. Um yeah, they want everything to fit in these boxes and everything they think that they can find all these secrets that will finally unlock the keys. But the thing is the closer you get, if you allow these things in, you start realizing that nothing actually fits in the box. Even in the most controlled experiments, there's context. There's context. There's things outside of the lab that are affecting what goes on inside the lab. They say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting different results. Well, the fact is, it's the opposite. The real definition of insanity is thinking you can do the same thing twice because you can't. There are differences every single time, but they're very um, fine. They're very they're things that are operating on the energetic plane or between the energetic and the material plane, and they're finding this out now. Now that they're getting into quantum science, that are getting into the whole idea with quantum physics that everything is connected and interlinked, and that's why they have difficulty replicating the original alchemy, is because the people that were doing it weren't taking in full context. They weren't properly setting up the energetic flows of the room to make the results properly occur. And if you don't understand how to do that part, then you can't repeat those results. Though that was part of the purpose. That was part of the thing with alchemy, was that it was magic where you could repeat results, where you recorded what happened and found ways to measure things. But they for one, alchemists, they always put things in there to keep other people from being able to repeat their results. But there's undefined variables, and sometimes even the alchemist would not be able to explain why it didn't work this particular time when it has other times, and you have to go back and find out why. But rather than saying, "Oh, well, it didn't work one time out of eight, so this isn't real," we continue forward. We want to keep working with this stuff, right? Learning. Um, you know, like I say, it's about that trying to keep things conformed, trying to have a false sense of control over the universe and believing that everything fits in boxes when it doesn't. Hey, Black Unigriffin, glad to see you. I'm going off on the placebo effect again, like I was a bit for a while last week. Did that little short today about it, and it just got me thinking about it. So they ignore having a relationship. Exactly. They're with objects rather than subjects. They dismiss the idea that every single thing has differences. There is no, like I said, everything has a backstory. Even if you have a line of plastic cups that are all made out of the same kind of plastic, the fossil fuels that came in to make those cups, there's different backstories. There's a history behind everything. Even if you make it look the same, it never really is. There is an, an infinitely complex webbing for even the smallest molecule of matter. And what I mean by them trying to deny reality is exactly that. That this is true as well. There's been an amazing amount of fraudulence over the last little while. But that's what I mean is this trying to pretend everything puts in is in boxes and that we can have controlled experiments where there isn't the context of the entire universe and its constant change leaning into every moment of everything that we do. They especially in the health sciences though, there is a really strong backlash to anything that isn't completely modern medicine, right? I mean, in there it gets down to the point that they try to denigrate herbalism and like that plants can't help when all of their synthetic compounds that they make their modern medicine from, or at least learned the molecular structure of, came from something they extracted from a plant or a bug or something like that. Something. There was somewhere where they found the thing that worked and then learned to synthesize those compounds. So, how is it the plant don't work at all, but a compound you found in that plant does? Yeah, it works stronger when you can isolate it and compound it. But we did that before. A lot of your shamans, when they were making healing herbs, they don't just take an herb and stick it on you. Sometimes they'll boil it down, mix things into it. They looked at the South American shamans. My God, they figured out how to do ayahuasca, the MAO inhibitors, and mixing different things together to make new compounds. None of this stuff is fake. It worked. Um, the placebo effect is part of what makes a spell work. It's basically a portion of the law of perceptions. Belief imparts reality. Now, it doesn't create, right? There is more to spell work than simply believing. But this is a big part of why it needs to resonate within you, is so that you can have it in the momentum and flow of what you were doing, so that it will line up with you. And if you don't have a belief in that, it's certainly going to make it problematic to line up with the flow of what you were doing. It helps. It's a big part of it. Um, but it is not all that is going on. There is, depending on the magic, like if you're working with what I call low or folk magic, there's literal, essentially quantum physics going on with quantum entanglement. Using the lock of someone's hair works because the molecular structure of that hair is still quantumly entangled with the person that it was connected to. And so whatever you do to this hair affects the person that it's still literally quantumly entangled with. So there's that. And then if you're working with higher magic, there is more going on than just the belief. There is the actual intent and rearranging of the flow of information and energy as it condenses around the material aspects of a moment, right? But that belief is still part of that. If I completely convinced you you couldn't move your arm, you wouldn't be able to move your arm. And it's the same with your soul, with your aura, with your energy. If you don't believe you can pull the energy out of you and move it around, you're not going to be able to. But that what I said about your arm, that's real. You hypnotists have proved it lots of times. If you hypnotize someone and tell them they can't move their arm, they can't move their arm. The mind has an incredible amount of control over the body. Now, this can affect people in other ways. Um, if you convince someone they are on a substance, once they're convinced of it, they will begin feeling and acting like they're on that substance. I've accidentally done this to myself before. And I one time saw one of my uncles get drunk off of a bottle of vodka that was just water. Though I have a hard time imagining how he didn't catch on at some point. He must have thought that was the smoothest vodka in the world. Isn't that just how traditions in the Southeast sort of tried to do using different mechanics to get past the self? Um, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me there, honestly. Um, but yeah, you know, and a big part of that, what it comes down to with this whole belief imparts reality, is that the less people believe in magic, the less power it has. I know that's very cliche. It sounds like I'm something from a D&D cartoon like Flight of the Dragons or something. I mean, they very much say that in there, right? But it's how it works. It's why you see a lot more of this kind of phenomena in countries where the belief in magic still runs high. Like some of the stories that come out of Malaysia. Let me see if I have that. I was listening to a Mr. Ballin last night. Let's see. And there's a way I can put this picture. Let me figure out how we can do this. I got something here I want to go ahead and show you guys. Okay, can I view? Zoom to, no, that didn't work. Huh. Okay. So, anyways, I was listening to Mr. Ballin last night. It's one of my people that I like to listen to on YouTube. What is happening here? Why can't I find? And they were talking about, and you hear a lot of ghost stories out of Malaysia. I mean, it is to be clear, magic is very real. There are things in magic that are going to work, especially with the folk magic. They're going to work whether anybody believes. You know, it's but even then, it's going to have a stronger effect if the people involved believe. Just like with modern medicine, if you were secretly giving someone antibiotics, they would be a lot less likely to be cured of the infection they had than if they knew they were taking the antibiotics, but it's probably still going to work. Same thing with things like war water. You know, you take someone's hair, put it in rusted water, which is essentially the astral version of synthetic blood. Whatever you do to that is going to affect their blood because it's quantum entanglement. There's a physical, actual process going on, right? And even things like goofer dust. It's a active. It's a active bioagent. What real goofer dust is, but through that you can actually make it affect other people that never actually came into contact with the dust because of the magical carryover. And even then, even if they don't know, even if you had no intention of getting anyone besides this one person, it's extremely dangerous stuff. But there's things going on beyond belief there, and even with your higher magics. But anyways, I'm getting distracted for the thing I was getting onto there. Magic is actually stronger in places where belief is higher. And this comes all the way down even to what kind of beings are possible to exist. Like I said, I was listening to a Mr. Ballin the other day, and they were talking about a story in Malaysia. Just want to see something real quick. Okay. Um, and in the story, they actually there's a ghost creature that killed somebody. And yes, in Malaysia. And that's one of the places where belief in magic is super strong. You'll hear all kinds of stories coming out of Malaysia. But there are things happening there that are completely undeniable because they have pictures. Let me make sure I'm getting this where I want it to be. There's got to be a better way for me to show you guys this. You come on. Right, maybe if I open them in a no, I haven't saved them. This will be fine. This will be fine. We'll just do it this way. Okay, so I took some screenshots of the story because they literally got a picture of this ghost as it was attacking the person, and the people fired shots. And this is undeniable thing. There's a person dead. There's people that saw it that shot at the thing, and they took a picture. So, anyways, let's see. Here we go. Share screen. Oh, okay. Window. Here we are. That's it right there. This is the full picture. Let me get rid of that bit there. You can see the person right here. And there's something up here. And then I have a closer pic of it where I tried to zoom in. You can see the body of the person right here. Definitely can't have this on a short. And like whatever that is, and entirely what my point was there. Well, it wasn't. They didn't view it as a ghost. They tried to shoot at it. Whatever it is, it ripped the person apart. They said it was a woman. And the lady, I mean, this sounds like one of your like ghost story things, like the lady was supposedly there was a lady in the car waiting for her husband. And for 45 minutes, she heard something pounding on the roof. And all of a sudden, the cops show up. Like somebody slowed down and looked at her and then sped off. And then all of a sudden, the cops show up and they start pointing guns at her. And they're like, get out of the car. And she thought they were pointing the guns at her, but they're like, do not look back. And so she opens the car and runs over. And when around the time they took that picture, whatever was on the roof lifted up. And they said it was a really long, skinny woman that parted her hair and had blood running down her mouth, and they freaked out and started shooting at her. She jumped off the car and ran off into the woods at like some kind of crazy gait. Yes. Um, I wonder. I'm not sure if I could because I mean, it's a Mr. Ballin episode. Those are literally screenshots I took and put on my just put it in my Photoshop program so I could get a better look. I wouldn't be entirely sure how to push that out. And you know, I'm not sure exactly where the connection there is, except for that belief enhances such things. And right, I mean, that one you're like, oh no, we believe too much, we could wind up with things. I don't know. People disappear in the states all the time. People, and even in Europe, where people are much more skeptical, but we don't get as much evidence. We don't. Yes, that too. But the thing is people disappear. You know, if you go missing 411 in the United States, people go missing in the wooded areas of the United States all the time. Now, I think that those things still happen here. There are still predators of this kind that exist. But because of the way the veil works, they have to do it in more subtle ways that we're unable. I don't know, like there's something going on there that this is one of the big things I've been trying to work out this entire lifetime is how to keep how to make that full connection. And like it definitely like has an effect. Definitely belief is part of it. Belief but belief doesn't impart reality. It does, however, help. And it gets the veil a little bit thinner in places where there's a lot more belief. I mean, a chupacabra down in Mexico, everybody believes in the chupacabra, and that's part of the reason that it is able to manifest, I think, unless that's just some animal. I don't know. I'm getting off on a weird tangent here where I know there's an important bit here that I've been trying to work out for a long time because it definitely varies on that. But I don't know. There is something out there in all kinds of places. And the more we believe in it, that doesn't give it more power to actually do harm. 'Cause people still disappear over here. But the more it is able to physically manifest in a larger setting, right? Like something like that, if it was to physically get a hold of somebody here, it would have to be essentially. It's like, how observing affects molecules, right? And in areas where there's not a whole lot of belief in such a thing, it needs to have that one person convinced, and it needs to be able to be in a moment where no one else, where it wouldn't be able to be proven to anyone else. Otherwise, it doesn't line up right, and the person is going to seem to have passed with something else or simply completely disappeared. We have all kinds of stories of like people being found in the national forest with all of their belongings just kind of piled up in a little pile and a person just completely gone. If you look at the missing 411s, it happens all the time. Okay, so yeah, there's a bit I'm looking for there, but I think I'm going to we might circle back around to it. We might circle back around to it, but I'm going to leave off of that for a bit here. So back to the placebo effect and I mean, what I just said seems like maybe a good reason to not want that much of a veil, but there's also so many more things, right? This is essentially one of the things that they use to force conformity. And it's become such a thing that it's not people intentionally doing a conspiracy to hold magic at bay. It's thought forms, it's thought processes, mindsets that have been worked into us by the people that were involved with such conspiracy way back, right? They convinced everyone else. They created a mindset because they needed us to not believe in these things in order to force us into the factories, you know, in order to get us to believe in Christianity in the first place. We had to believe, even in that, when Christianity began trying to convert all of Europe, one of the things they would do was try to convince you that only their magic worked, which wasn't true, was never true. But they led with that. And then after you get control of all that, then you start telling them that even that magic itself isn't real, that you don't have these ways to get back at your oppressors, to find ways to fight against, to take away one of our powers, a power that is completely independent of money or even resources in any way. All it really takes is will and intent. And the less we believe in that, the less we're likely to use it and the less power it has as a whole. Indeed. Definitely with Christianity, and it's just another version of that. You know, I talk a lot about my unverified personal gnosis. Well, I mean, you've interacted with the Horde some as well, but you know, they're the ones, you Black Unigriffin, um, they're the ones that tell me a lot of the things and help me to understand. They're a big part of the context of what I'm getting at here. I talked quite a bit about a being that was here that created all the monotheistic religions with the idea of conformity and trying to get us all to behave in a way that is controllable in a hierarchy, right? And that wasn't just the creation of monotheism and getting everyone into this religion where you're supposed to obey and worship the gods rather than like with the Greek myths. Hell, with the Greek myths, you basically feared the gods, right? Almost all the stories about the gods, they did something horrible. You didn't want the attention of the gods. And so what's happened here is you have this being, and he didn't just do that. He also influenced the mindset that was dominant, convinced us that we needed empire, that we needed possessions, but also to slowly force us, and this is the most important part, into a false reality of what we now call being practical or scientific, which is we try to pretend that everything fits in these little boxes and categories and genuses and all these different things, and that everything has these commonalities that make them the same thing. And this is a lie. This is a false set of ideas that is a focus of the mental plane that we believe is the material realm. We think we're being material. We think we're being, oh, well, this is the real world, the physical plane. That's the only thing that exists. But the physical plane itself denies that. What you're looking at when you see that, when you're stuck in that, is a false set of views that is fixated on the mental plane, on thoughts. And this is where we get the huge imbalance in our reality, is because we're not focused on the real world. All of modern civilization, every domesticated human on the planet is at least partially focused on this false reality that has been pressed into us. That's not the real world. That is artificial, right? I've talked before about how nothing is artificial. Well, nothing on the material plane is artificial, but there are things on the mental plane that are completely created, well, not completely created by us, by that thought form, by this controlled conformity. It's a thing that has been placed within us that keep us fixated on false concepts rather than the real reality of what is going on. And that's how we're so off kilter, how we're so imbalanced. And this false place that they've put us on makes no room for beauty, leaves no room for poetry, leaves no room for the things that actually move life forward. It's simply a categorizing of commonalities. It's a categorizing of repeated results. It's a categorizing of ideas that are maps, right? You always talk about how the map is not the territory. Well, that's exactly what's going on here. We have been, as a society, as the entire Western world has been pushed into believing that a map that has been written without full understanding is literally the territory with when we exist. And anytime you try to say anything outside of that map, well, now you're acting crazy. Now you're not being an adult. You're using woo. You're basically, they're saying you're heretical because there is the science, the religion of science, right? There's this whole ridiculous dogma around the idea that nothing is actually beautiful, that beauty doesn't matter, that aesthetics are fake. You know, this is the same people that still are trying to tell us dogs don't have emotions. That your dog doesn't have love. Your cat doesn't have arrogance. You know, this is, even though we even know they have the same chemicals in the brain that supposedly create those emotions with us, they try to tell us that animals aren't self-aware, that animals don't have emotions, that they don't feel fear, they don't, they just feel strong urge for self-preservation. No, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's one of them things where, again, because they don't know how to measure love, love isn't real. Even that stuff with the trying to blame it on the brain chemicals. The brain chemicals are a reaction to it. Even things like the atom bomb. Now I'm going to get real down to it. E equals mc squared, right? Energy equals motion times the speed of light squared. And what does that mean? That means how much matter or how much energy is in a particular piece of matter. And we still try to get past the idea that it's all energy. That proved it right there. They dropped an atom bomb over Hiroshima, and we've seen just how much energy was locked in a piece of plutonium or uranium or whatever the heck piece of matter that was. Right? So they use this as if it is I don't know what to call it, as if it was a way to finding that out is a way to disprove it all. But we just saw the energy being released. They certainly did in Japan there. Nuclear reactors. They're doing it all the time. They're pulling the energy directly out of matter. But they don't accept the inherent ramifications of what it is that they're doing. If you can pull energy out of matter, then all matter energy is energy condensed. And yes, they science does accept that now. I'm not trying to say that science is arguing on that. But the next step from that, what is energy? Energy is information in transfer. What is information in transfer? Thought. And there's where they're still getting kicked off, where they're still getting off the scent. It's one of them things where they think explaining the existence of magic makes it not magic anymore. They say nothing matters and there is nothing but matter. Exactly. And both of those, that's it's absurd, right? How can there isn't nothing but matter? They know that themselves. They know that there's energy and information behind that, you know, but that is the mindset that one gets from the scientific world. That's how people perceive it, and that was the important bit. The less people believe in magic, the more less they believe in the possibility of miracles, the more compliant we become, the more likely we are to succumb and submit. The more easy it is, the more easily they can force us out of the commons and into the factories. The more they can get us to accept monotonous mechanical life when we believe that is the intention of reality, when we believe that's what the world is. But it's always been a lie. The world is absolutely beautiful and everything matters simply because every moment is temporary. That's what makes it valuable. I've been talking about that a lot lately. This whole idea of nihilism, which comes out of science and the loss of romance. They hit an important bit there in understanding that nothing is permanent, everything changes. But that's what makes it beautiful. That's what gives it meaning. That's what makes it matter. It will never happen again. What could be more valuable than that? What could mean more than something that only ever happens once in all the infinites of existence? And that's constantly firing it off at all times. So it isn't that nothing matters, it's that everything matters so freaking much. You just got to pick what matters to you. Yes, they only want people to believe in the magic that can be controlled by resources. They don't want people to understand that they can find hope with a stick and a rock and some mud, a pencil and a piece of paper can be used to find ways to influence the world, to give you strength, to give you reason, to give you purpose. Because without these things, we become compliant. And this benefits the hierarchy, and it also benefited that being that was here. And we're dealing with that still. The thought forms of it are still around, and the people that have this mindset are desperately clinging to it. That's why they replaced God with Trump. That's why they become obsessed with all these absurd ideas, and they're really just diving into these complete fantasies because they're used to that idea, you know? And the reality is the modern world is completely made up of lies, right? And not just with this placebo, using this placebo effect as a way to get us, and related ideas as a ways to get us to see mind over matter and the power of belief as a false thing that should be pushed away. But also in, oh man, also in the, losing the words here for a moment. Let's see. Also in the, damn it. It's also in so much more than just the placebo effect. It's, I'm having a hard time getting my words out here. All of a sudden I'm all like tongue tied. Well, not tongue tied, but word bound. Word bound is the word, is the word I'm looking for, and that I'm having trouble pulling the words that I'm looking for out of my mouth. It's in everything where they try to strip away the romance, make things vulgar. It didn't just happen in the sciences. It happened slowly even to men's fashion, right? Now men aren't supposed to wear pretty things and colors and decorate themselves aesthetically. We're all supposed to, when we're looking nice, we're all supposed to wear gray or blue suits with all tie and a black shoes. And I mean, that can be a fairly dapper look, but what happened to the blouses? What happened to the plumes of feathers in our hats and the fancy boots and expression of the self? Makeup, the year was originally something worn, and they took all that away. They took all the self-expression, the beauty and romance. You know, they've literally tried to strip the romance out of all aspects of life and make everything mechanical and methodical. And the stripping away of the romance is part of what takes the magic out of life, right? But it's in everything. You know, I was talking earlier to Felix about how joy is seen as a sin, exuberance, pleasure, even outside of Christianity. I mean, it was definitely a thing that started with the Christianity mindset and the whole idea of the Puritans, and that anytime you're not thinking about God, you're sinning. So anytime you're having joy, anytime you're wearing bright colors, dancing, you know, all these things have been, we've learned to see as sin, as wrong. But it is the thing that matters the most is joy, pleasure, pure experience of ecstasy and exuberance. This is what gives us the motivation, the intent to live and want to live and experience. And the more exuberance we find with life, the more we can fall in love with life itself, the greater our magic becomes, the more momentum there is in our power. And the thinner the veil becomes because the more we are experiencing and truly interacting with life. And I'm not saying you got to be a spastic joy case all the time, but experiencing the beauty, allowing it in, allowing true interaction with the world, and finding your way to see reality rather than that pile of boxes and labels that we've all been had our eyes like essentially glued to through the programming that is provided within our society is how we got here. And you are correct that some of the more negative spirits, the ones that, yeah, like I said, it started. There's literally a being that we got removed, that we had to remove, and that was the whole thing. Is he was essentially creating suffering so that he could get our souls more compliable. Like they talk about with the Gnostics and the demiurge, but he wasn't the only thing. There are things spawned off of him and spawned off of just the predatory nature of reality and the fact that all this negative energy was there to be fed upon. Something always appears to feed on food. Something always comes. Something manifests. So, with all that suffering and negativity going on in the world, manifested things that would feed upon that. And yes, there are many things in that category that do not want the world to become more magic because the suffering, the sadness is what feeds them. All of your parasitical, all of your spiritual parasites. Well, first of all, if you're magically cohesive and aware of these things, they have a much harder time getting a hold of you. But also, the more you can see, the more likely you are to observe them and be able to do something about them. The more of the imbalance between the material, mental, and physical plane there, or between the astral, material, and mental planes there are, the easier it is for parasites and other things like that to manipulate you and affect you because you're unaware of their presence. Hey, John. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely spirits that benefit from the imbalance within the planes. So, um, that's the main point that I'm really wanting to get across today is that things like the placebo effect and anything within the sciences where they're taking away the unmeasurable quantity, where they're removing that which is not easily repeated, is like saying that easily repeated or measured is like saying the wind doesn't exist because you can't bottle it. It is the motion within the system. And that idea that the motion doesn't matter is the part of the mental plane that we are hyper focused on and are deceived into believing that is reality, that is being practical, that is being smart when it's not. These are lies that we are fixated on that blind us to entire parts of what is going on in each moment. And I'm not talking about some conspiracy of the scientists literally like trying to get rid of magic, but a mindset that has been manufactured within us that tends to get us all to go that way. That psychic sensor that Peter Carroll talks about, and I've talked about in other episodes. That is what this is. The placebo effect is a product of the psychic sensor, or the word placebo and the concept behind the placebo effect is a product of the psychic sensor trying to weed out the things that don't fit the narrative it has been programmed to initiate into how we perceive the narrative, how we perceive reality. It keeps us from looking for the magic. And if we don't see the magic, we can't find it. And if we don't find the magic, we can't repair the veil. So, we want to find the things that this was hiding from us. And that's the romance within everything, the poetry that is perpetually performing within every moment as it takes place to really interact. And perhaps joy isn't always the word, but to truly experience, to let the vibe of time and motion and life in, to truly allow the motion that moves within the material plane its place, helps us to see the true reality and overcome the superstition that magic doesn't exist, overcome the superstition that belief has no effect on reality, when their own mechanics say it, they know it, but they name it the placebo effect and they toss it away. They use that like giving it an as if they give it a name so that they could banish it. And I know I said in the last one that acknowledging something isn't a way to exercise it, but there is some power in that, right? Like if you have a negative presence in the room, you can name that negative presence and then command it to leave, which is essentially what they're trying to do. But they don't have the intent anymore. They don't have the understanding of what they are doing. There was a mindset that was literally manufactured in by the progenitors of this, the people that took chemistry and alchemy and tore them apart, knew what they were doing because they were alchemists. They had seen it. But if you recall, by then, the only alchemists that were allowed were alchemists that served the king, served the church. And so they tried to create a way to take magic from the masses and centralize it into the hands of the courts. You know, they've done this many ways in different forms. Places like Saudi Arabia, where they really believe in magic, that's the only people allowed to practice magic. In that country, if you practice magic, you can be executed for it, unless you serve the Sultan, right? They just go right up to, if we catch you doing this and you're not doing it for our control, we'll take you out. Still going on over there. But again, the jinn are able to manifest to a very high degree in those areas because everybody believes in them. Belief does help impart reality. It changes the way moments manifest by the level of balance between the spheres. And the more properly it is balanced, the easier it is for things to physically manifest in ways that can be seen by large numbers or even affect large numbers of people. It's a fascinating thing. And I mean, you can actually find varying degrees of this in the United States, even where most people, well, a large percentage of people don't believe in magic. But if you go into the Appalachians, Well, that's where a lot of people that disappear are disappearing from, right? You go up into Maine, everybody believes in the Lucaroo. Like a lot of people seriously believe in a Lucaroo. I actually had I met a girl up there that I came close to marrying, and her father was actually going to give me some property once we got married, and eventually a dowry. It felt kind of weird to me, but either way, obviously we didn't wind up getting married. I've never been married before Felix, but they were telling me about this property that they were going to give me after they got married, and one of the things he said was, "Now there is a Lucaroo on the property." Now, to be clear, a Lucaroo is essentially a French word for werewolf. But they don't believe in werewolf like, it's not in this case, a Lucaroo isn't like, American Werewolf in London, a person that changes into a wolf on a full moon. They seem to believe that it is a wolf-like, wolf man, somewhere in between creature that's just always that way, and they call it the Lucaroo. And people have all kinds of stories and even bits of evidence. Yes, a kind of a dog man. But I also clearly believe it's some kind of spirit because he was talking about how it would mess with compasses on the property. And I never actually did see the property. I never actually went there. Would have been interesting. That was, my gosh, 24 years ago. Anyways, there has been a strong, concerted effort by many different groups over the last 2,000 years or more to control and remove magic, but especially from the masses, it because it can be used to protect oneself. It can be used to fight against your oppressors. It has been used twice in this hemisphere. Yes, Kaya. There are things. Oh, hold on. Apparently, I'm coughing my little head off. Woof. Mm. Apparently, it's actually time for my first intermission. Back in a moment. Everything flying off my lap. Okay, I'm back. Okay. Good night, John. Dropped my phone, but luckily it didn't crack. Thought I should check that real quick. Okay. So, as I was saying, there has been a controlled and concerted effort throughout time to keep magic under control and in the hands of certain people, or completely remove it altogether. One of the first things I think of immediately is how is the different how many cultures treated those born different, because that is what originally was meant by such terms as a witch, or even in shamanism or Taltos traditions, people that are born differently are considered. This is considered a mark of magic, like the witch's mark, like I was talking about before, like where I was born with placenta attached there. Um, there are many traditions in the world where this is been treated as a good thing, right? These people are exalted, they are given their place, because that's part of the point. I mean, I don't know if I wanted to if I'd want to be exalted, but it would have been nice to have been placed immediately in somewhere where this is, you're able to work your purpose. Anyways, that's not my point. I'm getting sidetracked on my own little personal thing there. Kind of out of a job from modern day society where I should have been born with a job. But anyways, some cultures that's what happened, and then other cultures they put those babies outside the village and allowed them to be exposed to the elements and die. There's all kinds of different places where they would get rid of these children for the exact same reason. They believed that they had magic, and instead of embracing that, they feared it. So part of this is about fear. I mean, there is magic can be dangerous. There are spirits and that can be dangerous. But the point is they're still here. Even with the veil being the way it is, you know, places like Malaysia, you're able to get proof and pictures, but people disappear in the United States in the woods, down alleys and stuff all the time. And not all of them got kidnapped and taken to the Epstein Island. Probably where some of the people have gone that have disappeared over the last while. Awesome, Black Unigriffin. Yeah, this is, these marks are significant, have significance. It's one of the few things the people hunting witches in the Middle Ages did get right, and that's part of where they got it from, was because of the Taltos tradition. They were the people that were the witch hunters were extremely aware of the Taltos, because they were one of the last holdouts against Christianity. In fact, the last king to convert to Christianity wasn't a Nordic king. It was a Magyar in Hungary, and that's why they didn't want to convert to Christianity, was because they didn't want to give up their Taltos. Yes, the West put all forms in the taboo basket after the um, conversion to Christianity. But even before that, like a lot of the traditions, they'd get rid of these people. Romans, I believe, did that sort of thing. Well, I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't actually know what the Romans did. No, we know what the Spartans did, right? But a lot of your highly advanced civilizations in the old days were the ones that would get rid of these, that would get rid of these people, or make sure that they weren't allowed to become anything. And even beyond that, then as time goes by, we started just treating them more and more outside, to exclude and exile those that were different, those that were strange. And you get clear up to the Middle Ages in Europe, and they start burning anyone that was odd, anyone that might have had any kind of ability. They actually went out of their way to kill them, to eliminate that ability from the evolutionary line, right? Literally culling it away. Yes, yes, I don't mean all advanced civilizations. I get a little, I do tend to generalize, but there is always some resistance anytime there's a hierarchy. And India and China aren't actually exceptions to that. They tried to control it in other ways. India, they began getting rules about, when you had to be in this certain temple. And China, they turned it into a bureaucracy, which is actually kind of an interesting thing. There was a guy hired by essentially the state, whatever you want to call it. That was his job to make sure that the spirits were cool with you putting a road through here or putting a house there, or appeasing the spirits for this and appeasing the spirits for that. It's actually pretty cool. So, but again, like all of Asia, the veil, the balance for the veil there is different than it is in the Western world. And that's because they never stopped believing in energy. You know, they got all the feng shui, they've got all the different martial arts that use energy and chi, and they talk about it like it's just normal over there. That's just how things are. And so that changes the balance. You know, now in all fairness, I've never actually been on the Asian continent. I've never been off of the North American continent in this lifetime, but I can observe what's going on. And I've been places that are different in that, like just going down into Mexico, you can feel a difference, or in being certain places in the States. Utah is a real weird vibe. And that's where I'm from originally. I mean, right now I'm up in Canada on a island filled with aging new ager hippies. So things are very interesting here at times. And frankly, going on the reservations, things are different there. Things are much different there because they're, well, the amount of people having believing in these things. They may have forgotten a lot of the old ways, but they never stopped believing in spirit passed down. So things behave a little bit different there. And that's a big part of why I teach, why I go out and talk about magic at all. This is the personal motive in it all for me is the more people believe in magic, the more that belief spreads, the more it's imparted upon reality, and the more that balance gets back to normal. And I'm more able to manifest as myself and perform my magic. The more people believe, the more power all of us achieve. And the more we're able to fight back against the hierarchical structure that has been forced upon this reality. And that's another area where we're dealing with this resonance problem. Because, as I've said before, democracy is inherent within the creation of reality. So when you start having all these hierarchies forming and people actually believing in these hierarchies with like gods that are literally more important than us, or rich people being more important, any of it, all of it, it creates a dam. It creates ripples with how the energy is supposed to flow, and it creates problems. It creates imbalance. But so it being those hierarchies being there, that's part of what causes the imbalance. But also, the more we get other things in balance, the harder it is for that hierarchy to be maintained. Because once we all get to the point that we understand our sovereignty and the fact that we do have the right to make our own choices and can and are able to resist the mental programmings that are placed upon us, the less they are able to control us, right? And magic requires that. Magic requires you to be able to understand your self sovereignty. It requires you to be able to understand that you have power, that you have choice, that you have the power of decision, of intent, of purpose, and meaning. You need to have a concept of oneself within context. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a vertical hierarchy, role based hierarchy is a completely different thing. Like if we're all building a house and one of us happens to be a carpenter, yeah, absolutely. He's telling us how to build the house. It'd be stupid not to let him tell us how to build the house and argue with it. But we're not going to let the carpenter decide what's to be done with the cattle, right? And that's the problem with this whole vertical hierarchy is you've got a guy at the top that only thing he knows is how to get people is how to boss people around. He don't know anything about how to make decisions. You don't about how to make the right decisions. But you know, I guess I'm veering into the politics. But the thing is, politics and magic, now they're the same thing in a way. Because politics is just the study of power, and what is magic but the study of power? Politics is a form of illusion. Politics is a form of, well, ultimately, it's how we decide what we're doing. But when I say politics is a form of illusion, I'm talking about the governmental hierarchy and all that stuff. Because if we understand that we are able to control ourselves, then we don't need to be governed. We can resist being governed. Once we get to the point that everyone understands the idea of sovereignty of the self, but also responsibility for one's own actions and full context of the cosmos, we won't need governments at all, right? But that would require everyone on the planet being a sorcerer, or at least possessing enough understanding of magic to understand that they have context, and then we'd all be able to cooperate. But that's another big part of it, right? That's another big part of why those who are in control want to keep us from magic, because magic facilitates cooperation, and understanding. And the more we cooperate with each other, right? Because without magic, people can be easily disturbed. I don't know what's the word I'm looking for here. I feel like I'm getting off. Anyways, point is they don't want us cooperating. That's actually the more part I was getting into there. I'm not sure how much occult meaning I can really throw into that. I thought I saw something there. Maybe we'll come back around to it. But the what am I, they don't want us cooperating. They want us all at each other's throats, fighting amongst each other over a lot of times religious BS. You know, like I'm pure, like the Catholics versus the Protestants back in the day. That provided a whole lot of control because everyone was so worried about whether someone was Catholic or Protestant. They weren't worried about how cool the king actually was. And I just want to check something here. All right. Yeah, cool. Our Airbnb guests have made it for the night. Probably won't hear from Felix for a bit. That doesn't mean everybody start trolling, even though the moderator's away. Anyways, um, yeah, they don't want us cooperating. Because if we all connected together, we will be able to resist anything. You know, it's like I was saying before about that's how fascism works. Is because everyone thinks that they don't have a choice. You know, if everyone, but even the government, any government, if everyone in the government one day just decided to say no, then that's the end of it. That's the end of any system of control. If the people in it realize they don't have to and just say no. You know, like even like these data centers that they're trying to build everywhere in the states. All it would take was for everyone to refuse to build them. You know, if everyone said, "Yeah, no, I don't want a job building the data center," if no one was willing to build it, it wouldn't get built, no matter how much money was thrown at it. You can't just put money in a pile and expect it to turn into a data center. People have to agree. People have to take the money and do, right? The security guards have to be willing to keep you off of the Rothschild's lawn in order for you to be kept off their lawn. Anyways, I shouldn't say too much that directly. Yeah, there is a reason that they don't want us to know that magic is real. And it isn't just that mindset that has been programmed into us. It is, you know, creating that psychic sensor. It is a point of power. And this isn't something, it's not like this has never happened, right? Most famously, the Haitians used Voodoo in their fight against the French. And they managed to win with the help of the Orisha, right? And the one they don't talk about, did I use, they call me, anyways, with the help of their spirits. Sometimes I get the names of who calls them what, especially with those, because there's a group of spirits there that they all interact with slightly different names. Anyways, doesn't matter. The Haitians did it with Voodoo in against France, and the one you barely ever hear about is Jamaica, Queen Nanny, a practitioner of Obeah, and the things that she was able to do against in Jamaica against the English. You know, they thought that they had rumors that she could catch bullets with her umbrella and shoot them back. She had everyone terrified of her through her Obeah. And it's literally why there was never much where they was able to have slaves in Jamaica because oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the people. There's a certain type of people from Africa they were bringing over there whose name I all of a sudden cannot remember. The Maroons. They much among escaped a bunch of them escaped up into the hills, and when people had slaves, the Maroons would come down from the hills and free them and take them back up into the hills with them. And all of this was with the help of Obeah. Right? Magic really does make a difference. Now there was effects in World War II. You hear about the White Cliffs of Dover and Alexander Gardner, and then my own great grandfather Lemmy Stevens or Netemup is actually his name. Um, he was casting magic during World War II as well, and like you know, casting through his son who was over there fighting. But well, that's cool. That is very cool. It's actually a tradition I would like to learn a lot more about. Like to go to Jamaica someday and find somebody to learn from there for a while. But that's in the future. Anyways, um, let's see. What else do I have to say on this? Like, I have a lot to say on this, but I feel like we've covered a lot of the really important basics. What have I missed here? Um, yeah, magic is continually oppressed and suppressed and repressed. Um, to this day, like the things that can get you put in a mental asylum, a lot of them are simply symptoms of magic, of having magical ability. And, you know, throughout time, there have always been those that try to keep magic from being. And it all comes down to that. Magic is a threat to the hierarchy. Magic is always those a threat to those who are in power because it is a point of power that does not require control, right? It's one of the versions of true power. Oh yeah, for sure he would. Um, but it's like I was talking about in that episode, the nature of power. True power, as cliche as it sounds, comes from within. False power is being able to control others. And anything that is true power is a threat to false power. And so they have to repress that. They have to keep control over how it happens because magic and mythology is what moves the minds of men, right? It is what drives people. Now it's mostly in music, but music is magic. Music is inherently magical in nature. It is using sound and emotion and feeling and words to convey meaning to a person in a way that is more beyond just the physical parts of that. It is a way to make emotion travel through sound. It is inherently magical. And, even that, we get people deciding what the next music trend is going to be, getting control of the artists and telling them what they can and can't sing and affect it can just a mass management of the media. So even there is that manipulation, that control, but that is a part of it. That is how they keep us in line, is by managing magic through music, media, even memes. That's what memery is. It's a new form of conveying. more than just what the picture itself holds, right? That's why the meme magics work, is because it's an image that has more meaning in it than simply the shapes upon the than simply the shape upon the page. And when I was younger, I really did halfway think there was some kind of a conspiracy to hide magic. And I can say I think there was and is in some ways in the upper echelons. But most of it's just a mindset that's been programmed in. I think most of the scientists that are constantly going out there trying to deny magic and prove that it doesn't exist aren't trying to get rid of something consciously. I think on a conscious level, they truly believe they're right. And that makes it even easier for them to manipulate magic. I mean, they're never going to get positive results if they're doing these experiments to test psychic energy and powers and all that stuff. If they're actively disbelieving at it the whole time, that's going to be a factor. And that right there makes it harder to divide when they put the theater on the stage. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's that means of control, of manipulating the message, controlling what is said. It's why anytime you get a tyrannical regime, the first thing they do is start controlling the narrative. That's why free speech was considered important. Because there's also magic in the written word. There's power. There's the ability to move minds. And ideas are powerful. You know, all of us that are sorcerers, of course, know that, but it's known in many ways. It's known ideas have power. And so people want to control those ideas, want to control what ideas are being put out there. Yeah, they're perpetuating the materialist world rather than trying to suppress magic. That is a good way to put it. That is a very good way to put it. Like I said, I don't think they're actually actively engaged in a conspiracy to convince us of something. I think they mean well in their way, and a lot of them are very intelligent people, but they've been manipulated by a mindset. And as much as they don't believe in magic, they see its belief in magic. They see the belief in magic as an enemy, something that they need to dispel before their work can be completed. They see it as something that has become an obstacle to them. So part of them really knows what's going on there. They're realizing that as long as this exists, our boxes can't conform completely. But I don't think they're consciously doing it. Though they do see magic as an enemy, an obstacle. People's belief in the supernatural is somehow an obstacle to their learning. And so they find ways to toss it away. Like I said, they try to give it a name so that they can exercise it. This is an infantile superstition. That's what they say. But they're so close to finally switching around to the other side. I think they're going to hit it at some point with this quantum physics. They know now about quantum entanglement. They know that observing something can affect the outcome. They're right there to realizing the superstition was that magic didn't exist. Doubt of magic is a superstition. It's something people believe to make them feel like they have more control over the universe than they do because they think that they can only control the material plane. So they're afraid. They're afraid of the wind. They're afraid of the motion of reality. They want everything to stay still so they can hold it right here and take things out of context and have something isolated. And what they don't realize is even in a vacuum, there is no isolation. There is no away. There is no way to take anything completely out of context and isolate it for study. You can create lab like environments, which can isolate almost everything that's moving on the material plane. But a big part of like I was backtracking, that's a big part of why their experiments don't work. These scientists that are trying to measure psychic abilities and stuff like that, they're there actively believing against. And their belief is a part of what's imparting reality, especially where they're doing all their theater of operations, where they're doing their ritual of placing out the electrodes, doing whatever it is they're doing in the study. They're performing their ritual as a banishment, whether they realize it or not, as a banishment for any chance of the psychic phenomena they're trying to measure actually occurring, right? And observation can affect the outcome. So they need to find a way around that if they're ever going to measure it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this particular one. Is how, because somebody out there that's willing to give, I forget who is there, somebody offering $1 million reward for someone who can prove the existence of magic. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to prove that in a way that can be verifiably measured. I mean, the best argument I have is the placebo effect. It's not the only argument I have. I can explain a lot of things, but that can be measured in their thing. But even then, somehow that doesn't count as magic. I've never, it makes no sense to me. That's clearly people getting better through a theater of operation, through the operation of ritual, which ends in them getting being given a pill or whatever is going to happen. An interesting part about that, by the way, is that um, apparently, you can tell them they are being given a sugar pill. Still, some of them will get better, right? Because of the repetition. That's what I was talking about before about how it's not even just the oh, Felix, you're back. Good. Hello, my love. Um, it's not even just the belief imparting reality. that's going on there with this placebo effect. It's also partially the repetition of cycles, the law of repetition. Every time a pattern is repeated, the momentum of its cycle increases. And so there is a movement of energy of just how reality manifests, that if you were taken somewhere and given all the things that are done to you that usually makes a person feel better, there is a motion or a tendency or a precedent that will push you towards feeling better, even if you know it's a sugar pill. And I'd like to know what the difference there is between people that know it's a sugar pill and people that didn't. That study has been done, actually. I may have to look into that. Let's see, what are you saying here, love? It'd be interesting to try and devise a double-blind experiment for suppression of results in psi magic measurement studies. Like if there was a group being tested for some psi originating results, and part of the group was given info to actually cheat and score slightly better. How many of the people doing the measuring and evaluating the results would assess all results as being statistically insignificant? Huh. That would be interesting. So, like what you're saying, like the people that would actually be doing the study would be the people being tested. And you'd have a control group that was just random. These people don't even necessarily have psychic abilities. And then you'd have the group where they are actually getting higher numbers than statistically likely. And we want to see how the people take it doing the testing itself would react, and that would be the actual test, right? Is to see how many of the scientists try to explain away the statistically significant results that were actually put there by cheating. I think if you're going to do that, you'd also want to have a group that was supposed that of people that were actually psychic, a group of random people, and then a group of people that were cheating. And then you'd have the same people testing all three of these groups and see what the difference in their results were and how they reacted. Actually, that would be a very fascinating study. That'd be very interesting to see what happened in a situation like that. Very good idea, love. Now we just need to start an institute. See, this is why the guild needs to be much. This is why the sorcerers guild needs to be well funded, so we can afford to run experiments like that. Start a GoFundMe to run this experiment, but then how would you get people that were unbiased? Because the odds are anybody interested in that would have known about the GoFundMe. Anyways, so where are we at? 2 hours in. What else? Okay, yeah, absolutely. Of course, the researchers wouldn't know that there was all three groups. We would be telling them that all three groups were psychics being tested, or telling them that all three groups are just random people. Because of legal things, the researchers would have to know that they also were part of the were part of a test because it's the law. But that's all they'd have to know, that they too were being part of a test. Were being part of a test. They wouldn't know they were the only ones being tested. But you don't have to tell people what the you don't have to tell people what the test is going to be, but you do have to get consent for them to be tested for ethical reasons. Anyways, let's see. I feel like I've got a lot more to say on this, but I'm not sure what I haven't covered. There's stuff we've been ranging all over the place. I didn't have much time to like plan out what I was going to say. Not that I ever do much, honestly. Um, yeah. So, um, comments, questions, or concerns? Anything any of you feel that I missed in relation to this field? All right. This essentially all comes down to the idea that once people are convinced of something, they will disregard evidence to the contrary. And it's interesting that science knows this, but still uses the placebo effect the way it does. Because this is a known thing in psychology. And even again, this points out to them that belief imparts reality, because it's a known thing in psychology that whatever narrative you are convinced of, you will seek that out in the world, and you will have a, oh my, you think I would know this term right off the top of my head? I'm always checking for it in my own stuff. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. You will see the things that you believe to be true. And so that's going to affect your reality. So right there you go. Belief imparts reality right there. But also, I'm really losing this one here. Okay, but also, okay, so let's see, what the heck did I just say? Yeah, the breakdown effect. But you have this confirmation bias, but they don't see it applying to themselves. They don't see it in what they're doing, right? That they clearly have a confirmation bias, that they're clearly trying to find a way that it's all material planes still, even though they found out things like observation can affect the outcome. They found out things that, yes, all energy is matter condensed, and all energy is just information in transfer, but it couldn't be thought. There couldn't be a connection. Somehow they think that disproves everything. They find out, you know, I hate to use this metaphor, but it's a pretty good one. How can you deny the hand of God when you have felt it move? Yes, that's exactly it. Showing people evidence against their stubborn beliefs, and they'll hunker down and still believe the untrue thing. And this is a known thing in psychology, but then they respond to anything that hints at that their own understanding of reality is flawed in this particular way, and they do the same thing. They hunker down, call it placebo effect, try to throw it away. Even the supernatural stuff, they're like trying, they keep trying to prove that it really is an electromagnetic field. They're doing all these studies trying to prove that it's electromagnetic fields that cause supernatural phenomena, which then, if they could have proved it, they would have then used that to say it didn't exist. Which, even if they just found, like, it somewhere where there was no electricity, like, oh, well, there's just an electromagnetic field. There's this field of energy here. So obviously ghosts don't exist because there's this field of energy walking around causing things shaped like a human soul. So obviously souls aren't real. You know, it's like they think explaining a thing makes it not there anymore. Like explaining it makes it no longer matter, makes it not exist. That's how we strip. That's how they've stripped. That's how they view science as a means to strip away the age of romance. They even call it that, the age of romance, and how science answering questions is taken away the mystery. Eh, there's so much mystery out there. I mean, that's another thing. To me, the words mystery and magic and chaos are all related, right? They're all simply facets of the word Manitou. So when I hear them say that, I hear them literally saying that we've explained things and it took the magic and it's taken away the magic. No, it didn't work like that. Yes, you're not seeing what it is you're saying. When they said E equals MC squared, they had revealed the whole thing. It's all an interconnected field of energy. That proves it right there. Because if it's all energy, if all matter is condensed energy, that includes the air. And that means at some point, at least some aspect of that right there proves we are all one interconnected field of energy. Just like the magicians have been saying since the beginning of time, just like the shamans said way back in the web of life, in the interconnectedness of all things. They found the body of spirit, and then they say there is no spirit. The same thing is what they're doing here with what they do with the placebo effect. They have found proof the placebo effect is real, and then they say faith healing doesn't work. They say this proves faith healing doesn't work. What? You found out faith can create healing effects, and that proves faith healing doesn't work? No. You simply found part of how it does work. But that same part affects your own medicine. Does that mean antibiotics don't work because there's a placebo effect going on with it? That's what they're using to deny the things like, okay, well, there's a placebo effect, so that means it's not real. Well, there's a placebo effect involved with your damn pill. You have to use sugar pills to try and isolate and find out how much of it is just that as you do the study. So what? That means your pill does it. That makes your pill just as unreal as the Reiki practice. Especially for certain diseases, the alternative healing methods sometimes turn out to be better. I always say go with both. Funny how that is in chaos magic and chaos magicians. There's the whimsy hippy dippy tie-dye t-shirt types and the ultra dry nerd scientist chaos magicians. And then there's I like to think I'm somewhere in between. I mean, because I actually do very much believe in science. I am very interested in science and the scientific principle, and I want to have that empirical understanding of things. But it's useless if you think it's the only thing. Well, not useless. I mean, that's how they made you know, it's how we're talking to each other right now is through the magic of science. But there's energy involved in all that. They proved right there that information can be carried on energy. They're using that fact to carry my voice into your room, right? The fact, the fact that energy can carry information and can convey purpose and intent is why you can hear me right now. That right there, if it isn't magic, proves magic is possible because there's meaning being carried along on energy. It just being used in a different way rather than using that energy to carry that message to then use it to another to then make that same message come out on the other end of a receiver. We're using that energy to shape the way a moment manifests by reweaving the lines of energy that are manifesting in that moment to cause that moment to occur. All matter is energy. It's all running on frequencies. We're simply changing the frequencies in a different way than what this microphone on this end is doing in the receiver on your end. But it's still a communication. You know, it's still information, it's still energy carrying information. The Ellis sigil. Oh yeah. Yeah, chaos magic once it's got you, you're pretty much in. Once you have touched the mystery, you realize it's always been there. Well, eventually you realize it's always been there. You can't escape it. You never was away from it. But the Ellis in particular can be quite the yes, it's communication literally on a black mirror. Indeed. Indeed. I mean, that's the madness of science is that most science is actively proving that the theories behind magic are real, especially all of this media and electronics. It's proof that information can be carried through energy. You know, I mean, look, you're seeing me even, and that's all from energy being carried with the line down the line that has all the information of that. And in a lot of cases, some of you watching it, like especially you, Kiana, there is a beam made probably up to a satellite back to another receiver somewhere. That energy is being carried all that way with that information still encoded into it. So obviously, energy can information can be encoded into energy. So how do they look at us absurd when we say we're encoding information into this energy that is part of the weaving of a moment, especially when they know that observation can affect outcomes. Observation can affect outcomes and energy can carry information. Then how can you possibly presume that magic doesn't work? It's absurd. You've proved that it can. I mean, yeah, I can't cast a fireball. I can't go shoot lightning out of my finger. Maybe if the balance was more correct, possibly I could, and maybe I just need to believe more. I don't know. What the heck was that? Y'all saw that too, right? Like, I only saw it on the screen. There was nothing here that did appear on the screen, right? Like that thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing it because no new. Oh, that was odd. It wasn't a moth. I don't. So I didn't see anything here. Like it. That was weird. Now there are moths in the studio sometimes, but there was like a Orby like thing. It was white and gold. No, we were just talking about the Ellis, but I was also like, it's right after I said I can't shoot fingertip uh, fireball on my fingertips, and right about the time I said maybe I just need to believe more. I don't know. All of a sudden there was this. I'll check it out on the replay. Apparently, no one else caught that. If it is on the screen, could be I don't know. Maybe I need to smoke a little less of the weed or something. Yeah, Ellis is very interesting. She is quite the character. Um, I have had quite a bit of interaction with Ellis, especially when we were linking the linking sigil with the S1 sigil project with Ryan Lloyd. We were actually um, linking them in cooperation because they're very similar sigils. And the S1 sigil, when I originally made it, it actually predates the Ellis, maybe. I'm a little bit younger than the rest of those guys. I think maybe, I don't know. I feel like the Ellis sigil is a lot older than what people tend to think of it as at this time. Like most people seem to think it came out around the year 2000. I actually have to ask Ryan Lloyd when he originally made it because he made it clear back before DKMU was a thing. The Dark Knights and the Maraud. I forget what DKMU stands for, but it was the Dark Knights of Chaos and Raiders of Mamu. They were two separate groups that joined, and he was just a Raider of Mamu when it started. These are different Chaos magic. Anyways, um, it was originally created essentially as a practical joke. It's a sigil used to create cracks in reality. That's why it can be so scary and wild like it is, because it was used to essentially as part of OMF, Operation Mindfuck. It was supposed to be used as a way to cause odd phenomena to happen to people that would make them reconsider their conceptions of reality, which is the reason for all OMFs. But over time, it became a linking sigil to be connected to other product, connected to other things. But either way, um, the S1 said what kind of stood for Society of One, which is why it was the S1 in the first place. And then I used it as the sigil to mark the spot where I was linked to the Horde. Well, originally, eventually linked to the Horde. But the reason I used it in that spot, I didn't know any of those things. I had already come up with the sigil, and it was this idea of um, I was originally going to go thinking of Loner Society, which would have been an L and an S, like the LS sigil. Yes, you wanted magic to leak back into the world. Yeah, Ryan Lloyd. That'd be Ryan Lloyd. But I originally started with I was gonna almost went loner society instead of society of one, but the idea was very much like what I have now. Is I wanted to have this thing where we all these people could be connected, but still be solitary. You know, community for the loner, essentially. And when I reached when I finally reached that spot of on the edge of the nothing, the spot I had gone when I died as a child, I finally managed to get back to that spot with the cherry flavored cigar and meditation. Um, it was just the first sigil that was in my mind because I'd been working on it for quite a while, making it look exactly as I wanted. So it was very in my mind. It's like, well, I need something to mark this spot. So I marked it with the S1 sigil and used that to get back there. And then I met the hordes there. And, anyways, eventually we connected the S1 sigil and the Ellis. That's where the S's and the is and all that come from. But um, the Ellis was the material manifestation of the S1 sigil, and the S1 sigil was the astral manifestation of the LS. Thank you, Felix. There was an oval of light that whooshed around. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, Ryan Lloyd's a pretty good guy. I went on the Junkyard Salvage podcast with him a couple times. We've talked quite a bit. Like I said, during the S1 project, him and I cooperated to create that bridge between the LS and the S1 sigil and finally create a connection between them where they were clearly connected sigils that were manifestations of each other on opposite ends. Like I'd rather like to meet that Ryan Lloyd someday in person. We've talked quite a bit. But interesting guy. Yeah, there's a few versions of it. If you look through the thing, there's the S's, there's the is, which I've done a couple of videos on the is, which is yeah, it's actually we talked about it in the Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2. You can use it as a part of a banishing, but also a manifestation with that as a so it is, which is actually I lowercase I and a Z. I believe the oh no, it's a short I'm putting out tomorrow. It's I and then the uppercase Z. Well, it's part of for removing the gap, for helping bridge the gap between the planes. But I mean the combination in the is, I have a few videos on it. Hold on, I'll just show all. What's the right one? Because I want. Apparently, I have quite a few video. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. That's the one. Oh, I got a whole bunch of them here. I should have these on a playlist or something. Anyways, you can look up is on my channel. This one, I think, if I recall correctly, is my favorite one on it. It's definitely the one I was being the funnest. Oh, I'm gonna was interested. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. Primary things the is can be used for is well, I should have talked about it when I was talking about the pew pew. It is a way to push energy out. And you can actually use the is to knock something to the S1 sigil. I know that sounds counterproductive. It's something you might not want to do, but because it's a place where everyone is free and nothing can be harmed, no harm can be performed, and it's also somewhere where the horde can then can assist. It is a fairly useful astral combat thing to use the is and hit something that you want to then just knock it to the S1 sigil, and then from there it can calm down and go about its business somewhere else. I mean, horde can't cause harm to anyone there either. To be clear, the location of the S1 sigil, no harm can be caused, but that does make it a safe place to blast something. But it's also can be used, like I said, for adding power to your intentions, like so it is pronouncing it with the Z. Um, yeah, I talked quite a bit in the is videos, like that one. What is wrong with this reality? I talked quite a bit in that one about this um imbalance in the planes. But I'm going to be talking about that more in the future because I feel like on this live, even, I'm starting to get a better understanding of where the lie is placed on the mental plane. And I'm not quite there yet. I see it. I am not fully able to expand on what I'm looking at in my mind. Hmm. Well, because of how it works, yeah, you probably wouldn't be able to heal anybody at the S1 sigil either, because you're not able to affect other people's forms, right? Like, so yeah, no, you wouldn't be able to heal anyone. It's an interesting side note, Kiana, but that is exactly like I can tell you immediately now that you've asked me that how that works. And no, you would not be able to heal anyone at the S1 sigil. There are places of healing you could go from the S1 sigil, but they're directly under the sigil where you cannot affect anyone else's forms or do anything else to to the cohesion of their self. You would not be able to heal them either. But unless it was like a parasitic infection, because if you go there and you've got a parasite, it's immediately going to fall off because it can't do anything to the cohesion of your form anymore. So other than the removal of parasites, no, you wouldn't be able to heal anything at the S1 stage. You might be able to heal yourself because you're the one actively changing your own form. The way that it's been set up is that you can't change the cohesion of anyone else's sense of self or form. And that's pretty much the only way to prevent harm. And that setup is a foundational aspect of what holds that space together. It wasn't me that did it, it was Grax mostly that actually set things up for that way. It wasn't done that way when I originally marked the spot. It was just a marking of a spot. Rax would be a horde member that is especially into astro technology and the creating of spaces and manipulation of frequency. Essentially, pulled away from like the two forms would become their own, so it would be removed, but then you wouldn't be able to harm it either once it was removed from you. It would just be there as well, but no longer connected to you because they have to because the parasite has to create a constant opening within the cohesion of your form to continue feeding. So it would not be able to remain attached. I mean, I could be wrong. I could go up to the swirly and ask Rex about it directly. He's one I'm able to communicate with fairly easily, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. I was only the original locator of the space. Grax did most of the work there. He's much better at that kind of thing than I am. Like he's talking about, uh, lateral hierarchy or for particular things. Yeah, the horde very much. There is no one that's the leader, but when we're making something like that, everybody pretty much most people do what Grax says. Tell us some stories of using the S1 sigil. Yeah, all right. Some stories of using the S1 sigil. Well, the very first one. Well, I guess it wasn't exactly the very first use of the S1 sigil, but okay, like I said, I used the sigil originally to mark the spot of the place that I had found, not because not because I realized any significance, but because it was one I had in my mind. Like I've been working on it. Now, as I've been working on it, I was drawing it on desks at school. And as I became connected to the horde through it, I kind of began to see it as a society. I didn't really know what it was I was connected to yet because I hadn't really found them yet, right? I hadn't really met them, but I could feel a connection from that space. So I started taking it kind of seriously. It's like I'm part of this society of one. But either way, I'm drawing it on desks at school. And I guess the design took off because other people started drawing it all over the place. Like it was on the walls in the school, other people drawing it on desks. And it wasn't my friends. Nobody in my friend group was drawing it. I never did find out whether other people had drawn it, but it went up all kinds of places where I hadn't drawn it. And either way, that was kind of fun in and of itself. But then in one of my classes, get this group project with this girl. And boyfriend, ex fiance, whatever, it's high school, all stuff, was a gang member in Trece, which is Spanish for 13. And it's like kind of as far as gangs go in Utah, it's one of the larger gangs. Anyways, he was in Trece, and he had given her a ring or something that he wanted back. But either way, we're sitting in the hallway doing the group project, and this dude comes up and starts talking trash to this girl I'm trying to do the group project with. And I did know she had told me something about him, so I kind of knew this was the boyfriend in Trece. And he starts talking to her and saying something. I was like, "Hey, dude, get out of here, leave us alone." And he says, "Oh, I'm in Trece, dude. Don't mess with me." And I just immediately I jumped up, shoved him. I said, "I am S1, motherfucker. You do not fuck with me." And the dude apologized because he'd seen the sigil everywhere on the way in, and he thought it was like the big gang at this school. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, and like buggered off. I don't know. Maybe it was my I get pretty exuberant when I'm mad. I was like, you do not, because I don't know. I'm only 5'6". And back then I weighed 120 pounds, but I don't know. I guess it kind of that time worked as an intimidation sigil. I don't know. I wasn't even trying to intimidate him. I was trying to get in a fight. No, 16 years old. I liked to scrap back then. Still wouldn't if I could get away. Anyways, don't want to talk about that. Okay, so let's see. And then I did really start getting a connection through the S1 sigil because I was mostly at that point using it as a power draw. Like I was drawing from that edge of the nothing myself, and also just to get me back into that state, right? Because I wanted to understand that state. Because the first time I got there was when I died at 8 years old, and I wanted to be there and understand it and get what was going on. So eventually, people just started kind of forming, and it was not surprising, almost like they were always there. Because these were people that I have known way longer than this life. So, like, it's hard to say when I really started meeting them because they were kind of always there. Just like, I mean, I can pinpoint when I first felt that feeling in this life. The first two times, I can very much pinpoint, but both times it really felt familiar. Even when I was a child, when I was overdosed on anesthesia on the operating table. There's a whole lesson there about realizing an autistic child is going to take your directions very seriously, keep the mask on their face no matter what. Like they told me it's important the mask was on, so I propped my elbow to make sure my hand wouldn't fall away and tear the mask off when I fell asleep. And they OD'd me on the anesthesia. It's like I was dreaming. And then I wasn't. I was in nothing. Like I conceived it as this opaque gray, but even though I didn't know any of that stuff at the time, like my dad had told me I was supposed to be a Manitou, but I was actually technically a Baptist at the time. I knew where I was, like, and I talked to myself. Even in my dreams, I talk to myself, and I told myself, don't think about anything. Here, anything you imagine will appear, and you will go there. You need your mom. And so then my mom apparently tried to storm the operating room to me, but I always went back to that. They revived me, and I survived dying. But um, there, I always wanted to get back to that, and it was a cherry flavored anesthesia. So it was after I had smoked a cherry flavored cigarette that I actually just kind of felt it. And I was able to meditate myself back into that place through the sense memory of that flavor, that feeling of cherry flavored smoke in my lungs. Anyways, then eventually they started to appear, and they brought me from there to the swirly, which I guess you call it the all thing. It's the spinning mass that isn't really the center of the universe, but is at the center of the infinite. It's a declared spot. This is where the spiral is. This is where the spinning. This is a spoke. And though the all thing is what we call the whole thing, there's also the all thing on the nothing, are spokes of the all thing as it spins, right? But then then there's the moment of me actually meeting him. I know what I just said about it's hard to say when I actually met them, but there's also the moment. And that moment happened in the big spin, in the spiral madness swirly. And it was a moment that's happened more than once. It's a moment that has happened to me at the end of many of my lives. I'm spinning in loss of self, of in the all thing. I've become dizzy, loss of form from death, right? And I'm just, and that's what, like, in this case, I was dreaming, though. Usually, this is what would be the end of a life. This time, I'll be going directly to the S1, and we're gonna. That should help with memory from this one to the next one if that's how we decide to go. But either way, in the dream, it's all motion. There's nothing but motion, but the motion tries to take on color because you can see the motion, even though it's not there. And as it spins, it finally takes on colors and psychedelic spots and spirals and sparks. And it just, and then it becomes this iridescent light shining water whirlpool, and then this hippie hand reaches out and pulls me up and says, "Hey man, what are you doing in there?" And it's this long haired, skinny, tall hippie dude named Fred with long blonde hair. He's like, "Oh, cool, man." And he sits me down and I become me. And we sit down and start smoking. And then other people appear. And the thing about Fred, the one that I came to call Fred, I eventually understand that that's me. That is one of the moments where I actually met my own higher self as a horde member. I am Fred or Yarvel. But the reason I was calling him Fred because in my life before this one was Frederick Fryman, Freaky Freddy the Fryman. And that's why I saw him as a hippie because that was me last time. Like the first past life memory I had was of Fred. But in that one, I'm older. Like that's not how I saw him. That's not how he saw himself, right? He saw himself younger. Like in my past life memory, just before I died, I had gray hair, but he's like a long blonde hair, cool beard. Hey man, what are you doing in there? And that's where I began to meet the horde, even though the first being I met was in some ways me. I don't know. It's hard to really, what's the word? It's really hard to put all that stuff in a cohesive order of events, right? We're talking about something that happens in the center of chaos. I mean, the all thing and the nothing, the center is also the all thing, but it is the mystery, chaos, the weird. All these things are the same thing, but different things existing in the same space. And that's part of the reason that the psychic sensor tries to filter out anything magical. Because when you get to the center of it, when you get to the very crux of magic, it is paradox. It is a thing that is not fully understandable. It is a thing that is beyond full comprehension. But it's simple once you accept how complex it is. But that is the thing that is feared. That is what the psychic sensor is ultimately fighting against. And part of that fear is that it isn't just magic that is that, it is all things. Nothing is truly predictable. Nothing is certain and sure. Everything is moving, everything dances, everything is subject to impermanence. And yes, that can be scary, but it doesn't make anything meaningless. In fact, that is what gives everything meaning, is the fact that everything built up to just this one moment. And once that moment passes, it's gone forever. That makes it infinitely valuable. That makes it insanely beautiful and amazing. It'll only ever happen once. Everything only ever happened once. I find that beautiful. Okay, so we're getting right about the 3 hour mark. I believe there's some. I believe there's a chicken inside waiting for me. Quite excited to eat some of it. Definitely out of wine at this point. Keep trying to get one more drop out of an empty cup. Okay, so trying to think of one, trying to choose one more good S1 sigil story. Um, feels like I should build up to that one, but I don't have much time to build up. I'm going to be going pretty soon here. I'm getting impatient for that chicken dinner. Let's see. I already talked about how I connected the S1, how we connected the S1 and the Ellis. But what's interesting is, um, well, for one, the first time I meditated on the Ellis without any kind of filter, because I didn't, even though they looked familiar, even though they looked familiar, like, oh my God, like the first time I did, I was like, oh my God, that looks a lot like the S1 sigil. I was inherently suspicious of the Ellis from the beginning. And I would use a filter anytime I messed with the Ellis for years. I was in my like it wasn't long before we began the whole program that I finally actually meditated on the Ellis sigil without a filter. And everything was like for me it was like grabbing onto a live wire. Just like and yeah, just an insane amount of power. I mean, I'd used it before then. I'd used it as a linking sigil as as a means of charging my own sigil work. But I was aware of all the pranks on it. You know, all the different crazy ways it's been charged and bizarre things that have been done to it. But I came to chaos magic in the Yahoo chat rooms in the '90s, where people were purposely putting like booby trap spell work in the chat box and stuff. And then yeah, I began working with it more, and I almost immediately began seeing her. But when we finally connected the sigils, and there was that actual moment of connection, there were several spirits that appeared and worked with us. And I'm trying to decide what all. I'm like, trying to decide what all I'm even can even say about this story because I still sometimes get in trouble for that kind of thing with the horde if I say too much about certain things. They have security protocols. No, the Ellis was just one being, but Iktomi was there. 'Cause I've been working with Iktomi for a while in working on the bridge and all the webbing. Iktomi is very good at understanding those things. He's a spider god from the Cherokee tradition, and there was Ellis. There was something else DKMU based, and then there was several horde members. But what was fascinating about it is when we were all done with the work and connected them up and made the S's. This wasn't the is just yet; it was the S's at that point. Um, my dream when we finally like hooked them all together, like I twisted them into place, we locked it into place, made the connection on which we would continue building the bridge. It's hard to say that I ever exactly woke up, right? There was just a fading of from one to the other, right? I just like that world gradually went away and I was in my bed and then my eyes I guess really slowly opened or I just finally come into that world but the very last thing I had a big picture of the S1 sigil on the wall and as I'm watching like I'm literally my eyes are open I'm completely awake Ellis Ikitome and the other horde members whose names I apparently cannot remember at this time. It's probably the things I'm not allowed. Probably the things I'm not allowed to say for security purposes. Um, we're still in the room, like what best physical manifestation I've ever had, and they just kind of went into the sigil over a period of like at least 45 seconds. Yeah, I feel like there. I feel like I probably should. Like there wasn't much of a story there because of details I am leaving out and or can't remember in this moment, so probably not allowed to say. You know, it's silly, but I like with the horror diet. Seriously, they have. Well, I guess maybe it's not silly. It was way more before May 5th, 2012, but they'd have all these security protocol things. Like this is the reason I don't have a dream journal. Now this was clear back in the year 2000 or no 2001. Yeah, 2001 because I was in Maine. I was 23 years old, and I started keeping a dream journal, and it was going along pretty good. And then I had a dream that, not going to say their name, board member came to me and he's like, "All right, look, dude, if you keep writing down in your journal, we're not going to be able to let you remember anything because it's a serious security risk. So either you're not going to be able to remember a dream from this point forward, or you got to stop writing shit down when you wake up." So I stopped writing shit down when I woke up. I appreciate you too. So that was an odd little thing. I mean, I'm pretty sure at this point I'd be allowed to keep a dream journal because we're not actively trying to um you know remove anything at this point of such a high degree. Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes I don't remember my dreams because my human brain isn't able to fully process what the heck was going on. Like I had a dream the other day where I know I did a bunch of stuff, but I don't know. But anyways, um, I think I'm pretty much ready to call it for the night. Like I said, I'm getting real anxious about that chicken dinner that's sitting inside there. One of the best things about living in a community home is there's often someone else to cook dinner. Group setting, whatever it's called. Community home makes it sound like I'm in some kind of like rehab or something. Anyways, yeah, we're gonna call it there. Good night, Kiana. Good night, Black Unigriffin. Good night, everybody. Be inside real soon, my love, Felix. And I appreciate everyone that stuck with me this long. Stuck with us the whole thing. I see we're making new highs of the numbers of those of you who are actually sticking around for the whole life. And I appreciate y'all. Even if those of you that aren't chatting as much, that's okay. I hope you all have a great night and bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tao.